If you can, please mute your mics. Okay. I am Amr Tablawy, and I have spent the last 4 years focusing on compliance framework, risk management, and helping organizations successfully attaining certification. I have successfully managed a wide range of cybersecurity and GRC projects, from the PCI family certifications like PCI DSS, PCI 3DS, PCI card production for the manufacturing facilities, through the implementation and certification of information security, data privacy, IT service management, and business continuity management systems. Also, my background includes managing SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2 for high-profile service provider. Couple of weeks ago, I was celebrating with my company iExperts the project number 100 that we working together. This is a quick brief about me. The purpose of this session is to equip participants with practical strategies and structured steps for managing GRC and compliance projects, especially those involving PCI DSS, ISO 27001, and SOC 2 project. The agenda will include GRC fundamentals, GRC fundamentals and importance, famous framework overviews like PCI DSS, ISO 27001, and SOC 2, key steps for compliance, best practices and lessons, and finally, question and answer. Okay, so let's start with why GRC matters and how it sets the foundation for compliance success. GRC term stands for governance, risk, and compliance. The term governance covers all policies, procedures, and organizational structures, ensuring strategic alignment with the business objectives. As for the term risk, it's the identification, assessment, and mitigation of risks affecting business objectives. Finally, compliance is the adherence to relevant laws and regulation and industry best standards. After that, if we are talking about the importance of integrated GRC, we can answer this in 3 main points: centralized policy management, consistent risk assessment, and unified compliance controls mapped across multiple frameworks. Now that we understand the big picture, let's look at how to manage compliance framework in practice. The PCI DSS, it stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, and the main purpose is to secure cardholder data and reduce credit card fraud. Key focus areas include the 12 requirements, including network security, encryption, vulnerability management, and access control. The second famous standard is the Information Security Management System, ISO 27001. It's international standard for information security management system, focusing on establishing, implementing, and continually improving an ISMS. The core concept of ISO 27 is based on the continuous improvement cycle, which is plan, do, check, act cycle. It involves systematic risk assessment and selection of security controls like the 92 controls mentioned in Annex A. For SOC 2, it stands for Service Organization Control, focus on the trust service criteria like the security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. It's commonly asked by the regulatory, like the central banks and the customers, for the service providers and cloud service companies. Now, If mention the overlap and difference between those three standards, we can find the overlap in requirements for information security, risk assessment, and access management. However, the difference can be in scope, audience, and level of detail. Potential synergy here is that many organizations leverage ISO 27001 control structure to help with SOC 2 or map PCI DSS requirements to an information security management system. Next, we will explore the practical steps to managing these projects effectively from initial planning to ongoing operations. The first phase in any GRC project, ideally including the scoping and planning. The scoping and planning usually start with defining the scope. This can be done through 3 steps. Identify relevant business by determining which parts of the organization are in or out of scope. For example, for PCI DSS, you might only include systems that store, process, or transmit cardholder data. However, for ISO 27001, you might consider the entire organization information asset or just a critical subset. Number 2, it's the inventory of assets and systems. You should create a detailed list of IT systems, application, database, network segments, and physical locations that fall under the compliance umbrella. So, example, for PCI DSS, map your cardholder data environment, CDE, and any interconnected systems, documents, servers, firewall, POS terminals, and any storage device used. Number 3, determine geographic scope. If you operate in multiple locations or countries, check whether local regulations intersect or complicate compliance. Example, a company with European offices might have to align ISO 27001 with GDPR data protection requirements as well. The second big step in the scoping and planning should include assemble a cross-functional team roles and responsibilities. This is to identify who will lead the project, example, project manager or compliance manager, and which subject matter expert, IT, HR, legal, finance you need. Example for that, for SOC 2, you will need representation from system administrators, product teams for availability or processing integrity criteria, and perhaps legal for privacy compliance. Step number 3 is creating the RACI matrix. Use a RACI, responsible, accountable, and consultant informed chart to clarify accountability and decision-making at each stage, at each phase of the project. The third and final part is the timeline and budget milestone. Break down major tasks like the gap analysis, remediation, policy updates, and audits into clear milestones with due dates. Example, PCI DSS might require 2 vulnerability scans per half. This means build these recurring scans into your project calendar. Budgeting and resource allocation, you should estimate costs for external auditors, consulting services, training, and technology tools like GRC platforms or security scanners. The key deliverables of this phase should ideally provide project charter, a documented project overview, objectives, and scope boundaries, stakeholder matrix, list of stakeholders and their responsibilities, high-level timeline, Gantt chart, or sprint plan showing key dates. For the control selection and implementation, it should, for the gap analysis and risk assessment, this is the second phase of any GRC or compliance project. This can be started with conducting the gap analysis to compare current state vs desired state. Review existing policies, controls, and process against the relevant standards requirements. Example, for ISO 27001, use the Annex A controls as a checklist. Mark each control as a compliant, partially compliant, or non-compliant. It also should include document findings like creating a detailed matrix of each requirement, the current compliance status, and notes on evidence or missing elements. Step number 2 is to conducting the risk assessment to identify threats and vulnerabilities for each control gap, assess the potential threats, example, malware, unauthorized access, insider threats, and vulnerabilities like the unpatched systems and weak configuration. Example for that is using a known methodology like ISO 27005 or NIST 830. List each risk and rate it. Example, high, medium, low, based on likelihood and impact. Also, you should maintain a centralized register. Each entry should include a description of the risk, potential impacts, existing controls, and recommended action. Example for that, a lack of multi-factor authentication, MFA for remote access might be a high risk under PCI DSS or SOC 2 security criteria, with recommended action to enable MFA across all external facing systems. The big task in this phase should be prioritize the gaps. Risk-based approach, focus first on high risk or high impact vulnerabilities like lack of encryption on sensitive data, inadequate firewall configuration. Also, should identify if any short-term or readily solvable issues exist, like updating policies, fixing obvious configuration errors to show early progress and gain momentum. The key deliverables of this phase can be considered into the gap analysis report, which is a comprehensive comparison between current controls and framework requirements, risk register assessment document, and recommended mitigations. The third phase of any of any GRC project can be control selection and implementation. This can be started by prioritizing remediation efforts to outline the specific steps needed to fix gaps or address risk, along with the owners and deadlines. Example for that, if logging and monitoring are insufficient for SOC 2, the roadmap might specify implementing a security of the information and event management SIM solution within 3 months. Also, you should ensure you have the technical expertise, budget, and time to implement each control or policy update. Step number 2 is the policy and procedure development. Should standardize the documentation by drafting or updating policies like the access control policy, incident response policy, password policy, to ensure language aligned with the specific framework. Example, for PCI DSS, update your change control policy to reflect separation of duties, test environments, and documented approvals. The next step should be the training and awareness. Provide a targeted training to staff responsible for executing or adhering to new controls. So if you implement a new data classification procedure for ISO 27001, train employees on how to label documents and store sensitive data. Step number 3 and the last one is the change management communication. You should follow a structured process for rolling out new controls, ensuring minimal operational disruptions. Example for that, when enforcing stronger password policies, communicate upcoming changes well in advance, provide instructions for new password resets, and handle help desk inquiries promptly. Please keep in mind to keep stakeholders informed via project dashboard, regular updates, or steering committee sessions. The key deliverables of this phase is a living document listing all tasks, status, and owners called Remediation Action Plan. Number 2, updated policies and procedures written in clear language aligned with compliance requirements, and training materials like the slide decks, FAQs, or e-learning modules for employees. For the fourth phase of any GRC project should be the monitoring and testing. In this phase, regular internal audits should be conducted to perform planned or spot check assessments to verify control effectiveness. Example, perform quarterly check on firewall configuration for PCI DSS or quarterly checks on user access rights for ISO 27001. Also, remediate findings quickly, document any deviation or non-conformities, and assign corrective actions with deadlines. Step number 2 is continuous monitoring tools. like the SIM and log management, track system logs in real time to detect suspicious activities. Example, Splunk or QRadar solutions can help meet SOC 2 requirements around security monitoring. Step number 3 is to control performance metrics, key performance indicators, KPIs. Track these metrics such as average time to remediate vulnerabilities, percentage of users with MFA enabled, or security incident response time. Also, over time, evaluate how these KPIs evolve to identify areas needing process refinement. The key deliverables of this phase can be included in audit checklist reports, evidence of regular internal reviews with documented findings, real-time or near real-time view of compliance posture using monitoring dashboard, and remediation logs to track each identified issue through the resolution. The final and 5 phase can be the certification and attestation phase. In this phase, step number 1 is to conduct or external audit assessment to select qualified assessors. PCI DSS, an example, requires a qualified security assessor, QSA, while ISO 27001 requires a certification body and SOC 2 requires a CPA auditor. For the audit preparation, provide auditors with a formal audit scope, relevant policies, and evidence. If using a GRC platform, giving them read-only access to required documentation will be sufficient. Example, before ISO 27001 Stage 1 audit, provide the ISMS scope document, statement of applicability, and risk treatment plan to the certification body or the auditor itself. Step number 2 is to address nonconformities. This can be called the remediation of findings. So if the auditor identifies gaps or nonconformities, address them promptly and provide evidence of corrective actions. Example, for SOC 2, if the auditor finds that certain user access logs aren't retained for 90 days, implement log retention policies and show new system configuration. Also, investigate why the gap exists. Was it a process flow, training gap, or oversight? Fix the underlying cause to prevent recurrence. Step number 3 is the final certification or report certification. Once all major nonconformities are resolved, you will receive your ISO 27001 certificate or a PCI attestation of compliance AOC or a SOC 2 Type 1 or Type 2 report. Communicating results, share the certificate or report with the key customers, partners, and stakeholders as proof of compliance. The key deliverables of this phase is the external audit report that summarizes all findings, nonconformities, and positive observations. Compliance certificate and attestation can be a formal recognition of meeting the requirements. Now, let's look at some proven techniques and considerations that can make a significant difference in GRC projects. Number 1. Use dashboards and visual indicators. It provides real-time oversight by implementing project dashboards in Jira, Trello, ServiceNow, GRC, etc. to provide quick updates on key tasks, milestone, and risk indicators. Also, use a simple red, yellow, or green system for tasks and risks. This immediately flags overdue tasks or critical risks. Also, track compliance coverage. What percentage of PCI DSS controls are implemented? Open, PS, closed gaps, and audit preparedness level. Empower project leads to pivot resources or adjust timeline based on dashboard insights. Step number 2, or advice number 2, schedule regular steering committee meetings. Steering committee, it includes senior leaders like the CIO, CISO, compliance director, plus cross-functional stakeholders like the finance, HR, and IT teams. The meeting agenda structure can be status update, progress on milestone, budget, VS actuals, risk review, escalations that need executive input, next step, and action items. For project managers, please be outcome-oriented. Document every meeting decision and actions. Follow up on under-resolved items before the next meeting to maintain momentum. Number 3 is to test once, comply many approach. Test once, comply many approach is mainly about consolidated control framework to map individual controls to multiple standards. Example, single password policy that meets PCI DSS, ISO 27001, and SOC 2 requirements. This approach aims for 3 goals: unified control assessment. Whenever you test or validate a control, record the results in a central repository, cross-referencing all relevant frameworks. Also, eliminate duplicate testing by referencing previously gathered evidence. This reduced cost, audit fatigue, and confusions for the teams providing artifacts. Number 3, update the mapping as standards evolve or new frameworks are added. Keep the repository up to date to ensure this approach stays valid. Document and centralized evidence. One-stop shop. Create a central portal or repository, SharePoint, Confluence, GRC platform where all policies and procedures, test results, and sign-offs are stored. Also, assign unique identifiers to policies, procedures, and evidence files. Track changes with date timestamps and details of what changed. Ensure only authorized personnel can modify critical documents while allowing auditors read-only access for streamlined evidence. For the evidence collection templates, please make sure to standardize how teams submit compliance evidence. Example, standardized forms for incident logs, vulnerability scans, training records. This consistency speeds up audit and reduces confusion. Lastly, start with the end in mind. Define the end goal, certification, attestation, or sustained compliance, and plan backward to create a clear roadmap. This is a famous method project managers use to break down their project and achieve the final deliverables. Now that we have covered a lot of ground today, what questions do you have about implementing or managing compliance framework like PCI DSS, ISO 27001, or SOC 2 framework? Any question, please? All is good? All is clear?
Yes, everything is clear. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for investing your time here today. Special thanks to the team behind the scene and all participants. If you have more specific needs, feel free to reach out. Below is my email contact info and my LinkedIn profile. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.